I'm going to be 100% honest and just outright say it. 2025 doesn't look as good as 2024 did for brand new JRPGs. Yet. Whereas 2024 had 19 games I looked forward to, with several of those games being brand new IP, and even a few of those games being contenders for Game of the Year in the mainstream. 2025 has 14 games I'm interested in, and every single one of them is either a sequel, remaster, or otherwise leveraging existing IP. No new IP, and for the most part, these are safe releases people who liked prior games will probably enjoy, which isn't very exciting for me, even if I am looking forward to playing the games. However, I have a feeling companies are hiding some nice RPG announcements to coincide with the launch of Nintendo's new hardware next year, and even 2024 surprised me with the existence of Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven. Square Enix in particular loves to have something exclusive lined up for new Nintendo hardware historically, especially my favorite development arm of Square Enix, Team Asano. And Atlus has definitely pulled through with launch exclusives for pretty much every Nintendo system ever made. So I think there's a good chance this video will only be about half of my JRPG story for 2025. All that said, Tales of Grace's F Remaster is the first one coming next year for all the major platforms, including PC on January 17, 2025. I'm happy to say that Tales of Grace's F is definitely one of the good Tales games. Granted, in the series' over 30-year history, there are really only 2 Tales games I wouldn't recommend, and they are pretty much the same ones everybody who's played all the games in the series never recommends, so as long as you avoid those, you'll probably have a pretty good time with the games. Anyways, Tales of Grace's has a really fun 3D battle system that rewards you for sidestepping enemies and then punishing them afterwards. Like a lot of older Tales games, you can also play the battles couch co-op multiplayer if you've got a friend or relative with you and multiple controllers, but I'm unsure if the remaster will have this feature too. Tales multiplayer is one of those features Bandai Namco never advertises because it's more of an interesting gimmick than a reason people usually buy the games. My favorite characters in Tales of Grace's F are Sophie and Pascal, but Tales games in general are known for having better character presence than a lot of other JRPGs, usually due to having actual personalities to begin with, which they proudly and humorously demonstrate during and after battles. There's always some character that will grow on you. The remaster does have some nice quality of life features like being able to turn off encounters, destination icons, and instant battle retry when things go wrong. And if you're like me and love making your characters look as goofy or as glamorous as possible while you're saving the world, this remaster also includes a ton of cosmetic DLC you would have had to pay a small fortune for if you bought the original game years ago. On January 30th, on the PS4, PS5, and Switch, Phantom Brave: The Lost Hero will be launching. This game is a sequel to the original Phantom Brave. Phantom Brave has a similar vibe to Nipponichi's flagship Disgaea games with some key differences. The first is that instead of a square grid that defines player movement, Phantom Brave uses a sphere grid on a field to determine movement. Allies are summoned by confining their phantom spirits to objects on the field. The stats of characters are affected by whatever Morona, the protagonist of the game, confines the phantoms to. Like Disgaea has item worlds, Phantom Brave also lets you create similar worlds with field objects, and you could do neat things like explore over-leveled worlds with enemies weakened by worlds created with weak confinement objects, letting you get high-level items with much lower risk. Similarly, you could create item worlds with stronger enemies using stronger confinement objects, but with weaker equipment. Like Disgaea, Phantom Brave has a lot of potential for the big wacky numbers and fun hijinks that go along with that, which have endeared me to Nipponichi's weird brand of tactical RPGs for years. As tactical RPGs, they are too easy for me to consider too tactical, and most of the fun lies in breaking the games than playing them strategically. But that's also a kind of fun no other tactical RPG really has, which puts these games into a unique niche among tactical RPGs that I enjoy from time to time. I personally really enjoyed the first Phantom Brave game when I played it years ago, and Nipponichi released a remaster of that game a while back that I skipped on since I had already played the game years ago. Also, as much as I love Disgaea, it feels a bit stale now, so I'm much more warmed up to playing a brand new Phantom Brave game instead. The only real new feature I noticed in trailers that I'm pretty sure you couldn't do in the older game is that you can confine spirits to things like cannons or wind turbines to actually use them to blow enemies away. The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak 2 is the second game in the Calvard arc of the Trails series. Right off the bat, I'm going to say this is a game for people who have already played the first game in the Calvard arc, Trails Through Daybreak. And if you've only played Trails Through Daybreak and no other Trails game, there are going to be a lot more things referenced in this game from older games that may confuse you. Probably the most relevant game to Trails Through Daybreak 2, aside from the first game in the arc, is actually Trails of the Beginning, and particularly C's story in that game. If you have never played a game in the Trails series before because you don't want to start in the middle of the series, I'm going to recommend a new one coming out later in this video that will be, without argument, the best and only one to start with. Anyways, I've already played Trails Through Daybreak 2 in Japanese, and every game in the Trails series that came before it, so I do have some things to say about it. The first is that I was personally disappointed with this game, and I can't exactly talk talk about why without spoiling the story other than to say it's very, very repetitive in its storytelling. I wasn't so disappointed I'd never play another game in the series, but this definitely felt more like a setup game to me for what comes next rather than a satisfying standalone experience that wraps up nicely like a lot of other games in the Trails series. What I will say though is that, aside from the storytelling structure, I still love the battle system, I still love the characters, I did at least like the last chapter of the game, and I'm still excited to play the third game in the Calvard arc, Kai no Kiseki, Farewell O Zemuria. So if you enjoyed Trails Through Daybreak for its characters and its gameplay, you should consider giving Trails Through Daybreak 2 a try when you get the chance. Just lower your expectations a bit when you're playing it. The Trails series is basically the long game when it comes to JRPGs, and each game in this series is part of a much bigger whole. That can be easier to see for players who've been with the series through multiple games or even arcs, over players whose first and only JRPG in the series was Trails Through Daybreak. Trails Through Daybreak 2 releases on February 14th for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and PC. Now, while Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii doesn't look like much of an RPG to me, I haven't actually played the game myself to judge, but it seems like Sega themselves have given it the RPG tag on Steam. Furthermore, I'm looking forward to it, so what the heck, I'm going to plug it here. I love the Like a Dragon series, and even as someone who usually prefers turn-based combat systems, I actually prefer Like a Dragon games to be more action-oriented to the turn-based direction the recent numbered games are going. I also think Majima Goto should have gotten his own game a long time ago after I played my first game in the series, Yakuza 0, so naturally I'm very interested in this game. Like a Dragon games are always wacky fun for the big 18+ kids like me, and the sea battles look a lot more fun than the ones in Ys 10 and Skull and Bones, so I'm on board. Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii releases on February 21 for the PS4, PS5, Xbox Series S, Xbox One, and PC. Monster Hunter Wilds releases on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series S, and PC on February 28th. Man, I have a ton to say about the Monster Hunter series, and the thousands of hours I've sunk into this series since my first Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, on the PSP. One day, I will probably release a Monster Hunter series video on this channel. Anyways, Monster Hunter Wilds has a heavy Monster Hunter World vibe to it that I actually have mixed feelings about. I did play the time demo for this game that Capcom released, and it was fun. It felt like every other Monster Hunter game I played, and in fact, I was still able to rock face hard with the hammer like I always do whenever I play Monster Hunter. There's a new wound system that's kind of interesting, I guess. I can't say I'm a big fan of the large open environments though, as I prefer it to be easier for me to get to a monster than harder, but I know a lot of people love that and it doesn't ruin the game for me. I do hope the game keeps the sense of fun it had with a lot of the joke weapons and armor Rise had in it though too. I personally liked Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak more than World. I prefer the more colorful, less photorealistic aesthetics and characters in Rise. All that said, gameplay is king for me, and that's one thing Monster Hunter always delivers regardless of how it looks, so I'll always be interested in playing the new games in this series when they arrive. I've played way too many Monster Hunter games to get too excited about a new one anymore, so as much as I love Monster Hunter, I'm probably going to wait for Capcom to release the expansion to the game and finish releasing updates like I did with Rise and its expansion before I actually buy the game. Then I can solo YOLO no life all the content at once in a 2-week period like I did with Rise and Sunbreak when those games were on sale for a pittance. Then I won't have to wait months for Capcom to trickle new content and monster updates like they always do, and I can buy Wilds and its expansion for a much lower price together. Now, while I don't feel compelled to purchase this game right away, I wouldn't fault anybody who does, as it will be a fantastic game that people are going to talk about at least as much as they did World when that game dropped. Now, I already talked about Suikoden 1 and 2 last year, thinking they were going to be released back then, but now they have an official release date of March 6, 2025 for PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Xbox Series S, Xbox One, and PC. Suikoden was the first JRPG I played on the PlayStation, and it was an amazing game for its time. I especially remember the extremely emotional music tracks and duels in the first Suikoden, which is my favorite game in the series. I won't be playing these remasters since I've already played the originals, but they were great games I can especially recommend to anybody who recently enjoyed Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes. You do a lot of running around in these games recruiting characters into your army, and many of the recruits are playable too. But this also adds a lot of menuing to change up new party members' equipment. I'm sure the remasters may have made this better, but the games are dated for their time, so I don't know how they'll compare to today's RPGs. Still, they are definitely worth looking into, and even if they don't top my lists, these games do top many players' RPG top lists for a good reason. The announcement for the release of Xenoblade Chronicles Cross on the Nintendo Switch on March 20th nearly made me stain my pants when Nintendo quietly dropped it as a huge community of people were eagerly watching Nintendo's Twitter for news on the next Nintendo console. This game was easily my favorite Nintendo Wii U game, and alone with the 700 hours I put into it made my purchase of the Wii U worth it, to say nothing of the nearly 400 hours I also put into the Wii U version of Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. These games were made for the Wii U, allowing me to enjoy the games on the TV and segregate the messier UIs on the Wii U's U's gamepad. Yes, I know, I'm a terrible person for not hating the Wii U like everyone else does. I just love dual screen gaming, and it's not my fault people didn't understand the console. Anyways, Xenoblade Chronicles Cross is a very different Xenoblade game from its numbered counterparts that focus more on a structured, rich narrative in large open zones. Xenoblade Chronicles Cross is almost a pure open world with relatively small sections the player would have to proceed through a much shorter story to access. Very similar to Breath of the Wild's open world structure, which Monolith Soft also helped Nintendo develop. The world is so big that even flying on Mecha, it takes a really long time to circumnavigate it, but landmark shortcut points definitely help with travel time. You're probably wondering how I spent 700 hours on a game with a 10-hour main story I mostly forgot completely about. And that's because I fell in love with the game's sci-fi world and Tetsuya Takahashi's best implementation of mech gameplay with the Skells since Xenogears. I hunted down every super boss, customized all my mechs to their frame strength, grinded very specific weapons, did every single side quest in the game, and accompanied other players like myself in hunting the world bosses over and over again in the game's surprisingly fun, connected multiplayer world. I love the side quests in this game too, more than I enjoy most RPGs' main stories, and even songs I didn't like so much grew on me, and I ended up humming and singing along while I played the game. Now, I love Yasunori Mitsuda and grew up on his soundtracks to Chrono Trigger, Xenogears, and the numbered Xenoblade Chronicles titles, but I am also a huge fan of Hiroyuki Sawano's anime soundtracks, and this game is absolutely loaded with Sawano's signature style. There's a ton of different music tracks in this game, including multiple battle themes and memorable day and night themes for every biome in Xenoblade Chronicles' gorgeous alien world. Anyways, after I more or less mastered and completed Xenoblade Chronicles Cross, I started all over from the very beginning just to play through the story with a completely different main and sub-weapon. Then I played another new game just to challenge myself to beat the story without a mech. Then I streamed another playthrough on my Twitch channel. I'm sure you see how I easily spent 700 plus hours playing this game. Xenoblade Chronicles Cross is still my favorite open world game ever made, and my favorite Xenoblade game ever made, even as much as I love Breath of the Wild's open world. If you enjoy games more for their gameplay than story, I'd definitely consider getting Xenoblade Chronicles Cross. And if you're a Xenoblade fan who hasn't played this game, I'd only recommend this game to you if you don't mind a game with less emphasis on story and characters and more emphasis on gameplay, side quests, and open world exploration. The fun combat gameplay in Xenoblade Chronicles Cross isn't too far removed from the combat systems in the numbered Xenoblade titles. I personally haven't committed to purchasing this game yet, only because I want to know more about the new content in this definitive version of the game. If it's just like what the original definitive version of Xenoblade 1 was, I'll probably pass, but if they added a lot of new content, I'll probably pick it up myself. And of course, one day after Xenoblade Chronicles Cross releases is another game I'm really looking forward to. Atelier Yumiya, The Alchemist of Memories and the Envisioned Land is the first new JRPG I'm very excited to play this year, and it looks like a very fresh game compared to prior Atelier games. The way this game has been marketed, it almost looks and plays more like a Tales game with its faster combat system and the more human villains in the game. Prior Atelier games had a more slice-of-life pacing, emphasizing NPC interactions to develop the story, and mostly lacked humanoid villains. This game does not have the cozy vibe many of the more recent Atelier games have. The new protagonist, Yumiya, also has more of a sophisticated older OL or Japanese office lady look as opposed to the Bishoujo look popular in many Atelier games. The game looks like it will be a proper open world, or at least similar to Atelier Rise of 3's large open areas. Yumiya herself can surmount elevations with her rocket heels, and her acrobatic flips are a nice fancy touch too. I mentioned in my Atelier series video how I think the more open zone direction from Atelier Rise of 3 definitely had potential with this series, so I'm glad Gus has decided to continue the idea with Atelier Yumiya. It may not even have the towns and cities typical of many Atelier games either, as there will be home customization features. I love the new character designs. There's a lot of other changes to the Atelier norm, like the way alchemy is used in combat. Whether this game will outdo Atelier Rise or not in sales and popularity is yet to be seen, but I'm personally really excited to play Atelier Yumiya, The Alchemist of Memories, and the Envisioned Land when it releases on PS5, PS4, Xbox Series S, Xbox One, Switch, and PC on March 21st. When it comes to Metroidvanias, Hollow Knight is the king of the world right now, without a doubt, and the expectations for that game are so high, I doubt the developers of that game will ever be able to meet them when they finally finish that game. However, I've personally always been a little more attached to Ender Lilies myself, and its sequel, Ender Magnolia, Bloom in the Mist, will be leaving early access on March 25th, 2025. Now, I'm not part of the early access crew on this game, and so I haven't played it, but that makes me no less excited to play the full game when it releases. Ender Lilies is an extraordinarily atmospheric Metroidvania game, honestly one of the best of its genre too, in my opinion. Millie, whom I've talked about in the past for their work on the Goblin Slayer soundtrack, did the soundtrack to Ender Lilies and Ender Magnolia. I have had a chance to listen to a playlist of the music on YouTube, and it's just literally everything I want to hear playing a new game in this series. Ender Magnolia looks to continue the dark fantasy traditions from Ender lilies that made that game so special. The crowd in early access seems to love this game as its aggregate overwhelmingly positive reviews illustrate on Steam, so I have no doubt I will too when I pick it up in 2025. Dragon Quest I and II HD 2D doesn't have a release date yet, and there haven't even been any gameplay images from the games yet, but I know I'll be buying these games the day they're released in the West. Part of Dragon Quest III HD 2D actually has the entirety of Dragon Quest I inside of it, so I already know the game is going to look nice. And while vanilla Dragon Quest I itself is a very, I'll just say, basic game, Dragon Quest II will probably have some decent personality to go with the characters in that game that are part of the story. And what kind of Dragon Quest nerd would I be if I didn't want to subject myself to Hiroshi Miyaoka's Frankenstein of a Dungeon, The Cave to Roan in glorious HD 2D. The Lunar series, which started on the Sega CD, became something of a 90s JRPG darling series during its heyday. I personally didn't play the games until they came to the PlayStation, and I did enjoy them, but I kinda put them on the same JRPG tier as the Breath of Fire series. To me, they were very okay JRPGs that sold very well in Japan. But I loved the extraordinarily anime aesthetics of Lunar, and I was always a little sad we never really seen games like them since. A lot of that has to do with the sad fate of the game's developers, Studio Alex, which consisted of experienced veterans from Nihon Falcom, and I think a feud between the Western publisher Game Arts and Sega may have also had something to do with the fate of the series in the West too. Fortunately, it looks like Gung Ho Online Entertainment is publishing remasters of the first two games to be released later in 2025 on all of the major platforms, which is great for people who missed out on those games or want to play them again on current platforms. I know a lot of people really love these games, and I can definitely understand why. And that's not all Gung Ho Online Entertainment is publishing. They somehow snagged worldwide publishing rights for Trails in the Sky first chapter from Nihon Falcom, and this is the game you want to play if you've ever wanted to play a Trails game, but found all the existing arcs and games confusing. This is the first game in the entire Trails series, and the only game in the Trails series you can play without being spoiled on anything, or having to do external research to catch up on anything you may have forgotten about older games you played or didn't play. And if you even just like JRPGs, there's very little reason not to play this game, as it's the beginning of one of the greatest ongoing JRPG series ever made. Given just how many people I know who wanted to get into this series, I expect this also has the potential to become the best-selling Trails game of all time when it releases, if Gung Ho can manage the marketing and localizations well. That's what I say to people who haven't played the games. But even me, who has played all the games and normally wouldn't want to go back and buy and play a game I already played, am extremely interested in playing this game simply due to the graphical overhaul. This is the kind of overhaul I would have been happy if Final Fantasy VII got, and this Trails in the Sky game seems to be doing it right. Now, all that said, this is a very good game, but I personally think the second chapter is better. Of course, you wouldn't be able to enjoy the second chapter without playing the first, so like I always say with the Trails series, the entire series is better than its individual parts, and some parts are better than others. While there's no specific release day, it has been narrowed down to fall 2025, and I think a release right around October would be healthiest for this game's sales, assuming Xenoblade 4, Persona 6, or Final Fantasy 17 aren't released around that time. Very recently, P-Cube announced that Class of Heroes 3 Remaster would be released in the West in 2025 for the Switch, PlayStation 5, and PC next year. The original Class of Heroes 3 was never released in the West. The Class of Heroes series is basically a wizardry-inspired anime-style dungeon-crawling JRPG with some unique mechanics thrown in to make it friendlier to play than wizardry. While I was playing Class of Heroes 1 and 2 last year, I noticed a lot of Japanese comments saying Class of Hero 3 was a really good game, so I'm actually really looking forward to the release of this game. I'm always happy to see JRPGs never released in the West finally get a chance over here too, so I'm definitely keeping my eye on this one. A game called Ellen entered early access on Steam on November 1st, 2024, and is scheduled to release its 1.0 a year from its early access release in 2025, or 2 years at the most. Ellen is the prequel to a legendary free-to-play Japanese mechanically rich roguelike JRPG from the 2010s called Alona. While the developer ended up abandoning Alona, the community continued to mod the bejesus out of the game, transforming it into what's got to be one of the most epic and mechanically rich roguelike JRPGs in the world as Alona Plus. I myself got addicted to Alona Plus, and it lives up to the reputation its fans give it. Ellen isn't quite there yet, and it's not free like Alona is, but the original developer of Alona has been chugging away at the game for years, and while I haven't played this game in early access, my best friend, who I told about Alona, is playing Ellen, and he's having a blast with it right now. I've even watched him stream the game, and it seems to have the same addictive charm as Alona does. While I'm excited to play the game when it releases, I hesitate to recommend it, or Alona, to everybody, as it is an adult game with content that people who take games seriously could find just as offensive as others find entertaining. Like any good roguelike, it rewards players who take the time to understand its mechanics. One day I'll probably make a video about Alona and Ellen, but there are already plenty of content creators creators who've made great videos about these games that highlight a lot of their wacky eccentricities if you want to know more. Last but definitely not least is a game I've covered in a video talking about the Rune Factory series, Rune Factory Guardians of Ozma, which is supposed to come out in 2025 on Switch and PC. Pure farming games don't interest me, but I love the Rune Factory action RPG games that blend the elements just right for me. This one looks like it's going to perform much better than Rune Factory 5 did with its frame rate. I'm a huge fan of the Eastern aesthetic and the farming animations too. This game is more of a spin-off from the Numbered series, and the developers made it clear that Rune Factory 6 is also in development, so I'm pretty excited and ready to play brand new Rune Factory game whenever they decide to release it in 2025. That's pretty much it for the games I'm interested in for 2025 that have been announced so far. Like I said, not as much to be excited about yet. I could have also inflated this list with a bunch of other JRPGs I'm just not as interested in, but I'll leave that to you guys in the comments section to share the games you're looking forward to in 2025 that I missed instead. If we're lucky, Nintendo will have an incredible showcase of games including RPGs from third-party developers to go along with their inevitable announcement of the new console. During their Switch announcement, they just happened to introduce all three of my favorite JRPG series as timed or complete console exclusives: Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Octopath Traveler, and Shin Megami Tensei 5. So my expectations for them to thrill me during the showcase of games for their next console is pretty high regardless of whether those RPGs are exclusives or not. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.